Architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are yet once again listening to Architecture Talk. Each episode we try and have a conversation with a contemporary thinker to advance the frontier of architectural thinking. Today I'm talking to the Dutch architect and urban designer Frits Palmboom, who has an extensive and well-haloed practice, who has been a faculty at Delft and other institutions in Europe, whom I'm going to talk with about his drawings. He has just published a book, one amongst many, documenting his sketchbooks, which was published by Moleskine. It's a fascinating conversation where we discuss how drawing engages the landscape and what that means to him as an architect and as a person. Here we go. Okay, so thank you for coming on Architecture Talk, Fritz. We have a long association. I have seen you in Holland on several occasions. I have been to your office. We have had dinners together.
Yeah.
And then we have had some memorable times in Chandigarh,
Yes, I remember very well.
where we have walked around the capital. We have looked at the student work from here, University of Washington, and we have had fantastic discussions around them.
Yeah. We cycled around even. Do you remember?
Yes, yes, we rode bicycles around the Capitol complex. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
your Dutch habit to just get
Yeah.
on a bicycle. Yeah, that's such a wonderful thing. Yeah, I grew up in Chandigarh on bicycles. Every day we would ride bicycles all the way to school and back. Now
Yeah.
the city has changed. It's packed with cars, and there's no traffic. There is no room for kids to easily ride bikes. Now it
Mm.
is a grown-up city.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things I remember about you is everywhere you had your beautiful sketchbook
Uh-huh.
with your drawings and just incredibly beautiful drawings.
Mm-hmm.
And I have in front of me, as I'm talking to you, this superb, beautifully produced book called Frits Palmboom: Inspiration and Process in Architecture,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and it is published under the banner of Moleskine Legendary Notebooks.
Yeah.
And I carry around a moleskin with me all the time. But of course,
Mm-hmm.
my drawings are not half as amazing as yours.
Uh-huh.
So I am. I would like to. I mean, we can talk about your numerous urban design projects and so on and so forth. But I thought we could begin and mostly focus on uh, your understanding of drawing and what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and over here in the book, after an introduction and so on, you have described drawings as a form of knowledge,
Yeah.
as something for experiencing architecture,
Yeah.
and as a design tool for norms and practices. So you have
Yeah.
organized these single weight, I think, pen drawings that are published in this Moleskine book under those three headings. And I've been through the book and I've read them, and I have all kinds of questions around it. Do you have the book in front of you by any chance?
Yes, I have it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Can you open it to page 37?
Yeah. That's the Villa Gambara.
Villa Gambaraia to 2012.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you would be willing to read for me, that page
Yeah.
after walking
Yeah.
around and so on. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
kind of a summary of three types of drawings. So can we begin by you reading that?
Yeah. Well, After walking around, I sit down on the edge of the terrace from where I can oversee the villa, the garden, and the valley. I follow the lines with my eyes and draw them with my hand, and eventually add the Florence Cathedral in the direction where I know that it should be, although I cannot see it. In the second sketch, my eye moves upwards, showing the extension of the garden behind the villa. The garden jumps into the into the valley. The sketch is very fast. The jump is like a gesture, like a throw. Finally, still sitting at the same place, I make a panoramic sketch of how the villa as a whole relates to the city in the very far distance. I incorporate the memory of how I approach the villa via the hills that encircle it. I experience the panoramic and the intimate scale simultaneously. It's a cognitive sketch. The act of drawing enables me to bridge the gap between different scales and to integrate different levels of observation.
Fantastic. Such a beautiful description.
Ah, I'm
Uh,
I'm there
and
again when I read it.
and you read it, and even though I, the listeners won't be able to see your drawings, although they will have links to your various things on the website. This description so sets up drawing as, in this place, a cognitive act, as a
Mhm.
way of knowing,
Yeah,
which seems to connect the eye
yeah,
and the hand,
yeah,
uh, and is connected to memory because you're drawing things that you actually cannot see.
yeah.
And you're also talking about gesture, about things that are, uh, not exactly as viewed, but which capture a kind of a gesture, a sort of
Hmm.
a, a feeling, a sort of moving feeling in the
Hmm.
landscape.
Yeah.
So, so
It's
tell me a
all.
little bit about, I mean, what are you driving at? I mean, people have been sketching for a long time, but you seem to put a lot of uh, uh, deep emotional investment in the act of drawing, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
more than simply capturing a view or making a really beautiful uh, picture or
Yeah.
making something that is very, Leonardo da Vinci. For you, the act of drawing is kind of a uh, emotional, cognitive act that tells you something more than what is just seen. I mean, what is that right?
Yeah.
What are you
Yeah.
trying to do
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the most intriguing question that I can imagine, Vikram. Of course, it's also a question about, yeah, your own way of moving around, looking around, trying to understand the landscape, to grasp it in a way. When I talk about that, the villa jumps out into
Yeah,
the valley, um, it's a kind of feeling that you can experience when you are there, but it's also an observation just about how the villa is constructed. The villa is on a kind of promontory reaching into the valley. It's not just in a passive way located at the edge of the villa, just following the contours and the relief. No, has been made a construction of an artificial earth construction jumping into
yeah,
the valley, and the villa is more or less on top of that. So I see I see the position, but I also see the construction, and this feeling of throwing the villa into the valley is also an act of construction that I recognize as because I'm a designer.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a kind of how can you? It's reenacting more or less also the process of designing that has been done some
I
centuries
see.
ago.
Yeah. I mean, reenacting, I think, is a good word,
Yeah,
because you also
that's it.
talk about retracing and you talk about the
Yeah,
importance of drawing or putting yellow trace on contour maps,
yeah,
geographical maps, architectural drawings, and simply retracing them. And you
yeah,
talk about how that retracing is a critical thing somehow. Yes,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
why? What do you mean by that? And you talk about time as an important element in when you're retracing. I'm trying to get to, we can get the architectural intention, but what is the emotional driving force as a designer to reenact, let's say, the design intent
yeah.
in this case, and retracing the drawings on yellow trace. Wh- why do that?
You know, what, as a designer, in a way, starting the design, of course, has to do with a lot of analytical methods and understanding the assignment and so on and so on. But for me, the most important thing maybe is to understand the character, the identity of the site, of the place where I'm in. The design is only incident. It's just the landscape, the city, the globe you are on.
Yeah,
It's a given that is all around you all the time. And, it starts just from in a sort of admiration, I think, that wondering about that all those things exist and that you exist
yeah, yeah.
and that you can enjoy it in a way,
Uh-huh.
that it can be so overwhelming. And yeah, it's about wonder to start with.
Yes, yes, I like the word. I like the word admiration. I
Yeah,
mean, drawing as an admiration, almost an adoration. Like the adoration of the Magi, of the land and the landscape, and this sort of wonderment at the
yeah,
place that we are in. Yes, is that what
yeah,
you're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about?
I think
Drawing
so.
as the act of wonderment.
Yeah. And then the amazing thing that by drawing, you can catch an area, a landscape, a vast, very extended landscape, um, many, many square miles, and you can grasp it into a little line that you can put on a little paper that is on your knee.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so this, yeah, I'm still wondering about that as well. That we can, by just making some lines, can grasp something of this experience of overwhelming presence of a landscape, um, and that you can miniaturize it in a way that you can make it so close to your own body.
Yep.
And by doing that, and then you can look at it, well, it's just a childish pleasure, more or less. Eh?
Yeah, childish pleasure. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's that's fascinating, and like you can grasp it and kind of bring it close to the body is what you describe the act
yeah,
of drawing. And in
yeah,
that sense, you get this childish pleasure, which is like an adoration, which is like an admiration.
yeah,
And in doing that, somehow in doing that, you can also find a way to put yourself into the landscape, which is to say, you can intuit and get a sense of what the gesture might be
Yeah,
that would be to design something that is in that landscape. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean that's
yeah, 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 yeah. So it has to do with a certain, yeah, in German they call it Einfühlung. You know the word?
what does that mean? No, I don't.
Einfühlung, it means empathy, more or less.
Empathy, yes, kind of empathy.
Yeah,
That's interesting. Does it mean literally empathy, or is there sort of more nuance to that word?
I don't know exactly. There is a theory about Einfühlung that I don't not very well. I want to read about that the next month.
Yeah.
Um, but it says that we can understand environments and objects and buildings because we have a body and we can experience forces like gravity, and we can experience uh, extension and in our body, and we can well project them or we can distract them from the objects and environments around us as well. So there's kind of resonance between how we experience ourselves and our bodies with the way we see objects and environments around us.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, it seems to connect to kind of a phenomenological view
yeah,
of things. But you also write that one of the great things about retracing drawings and then putting trace upon trace upon trace upon trace
yeah,
and layering traces upon each other
yeah,
is that actually after some time you find that you have made so many errors in the act of tracing that you've arrived at something else.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So there is also this idea of error.
yeah. That's my experience, especially when I use the sketch roll, the transparent paper. And I put
Yeah,
one layer of transparent paper so I can still see the image that is under it. But when I add two or three or five layers of transparent paper, the initial image becomes more vague.
yeah,
So maybe I just start with retracing and making interpretations and more or less abstractions of the initial image that is at the bottom. And then with
yeah,
putting those other layers, I create a kind of freedom because of the vagueness that I can the balance between precise knowledge about the initial image and the interpretation is shifting. In the beginning, it's very precise and exact, and because it becomes vague, there comes more interpretation in it.
yes,
And
yes,
so I feel more free to remodel certain lines. So it's a mistake, but sometimes it's not a mistake, of course.
yeah,
Um, but it has to do with a certain vagueness that is also creates a certain freedom and a certain
yeah, yeah,
distance that makes within this distance between the initial image and the layer that I put on it, um, there is a freedom of interpretation, and that's a good
right.
thing in the design process.
It seems to me that there is a almost a necessary contradiction, which is that on the one hand there is this desire to see and retrace and observe and admire
Mhm.
exactly,
Yeah,
but there is also within that observation, exact observation, the possibility of error, which is a necessary thing
yeah,
to the design thinking. I mean, it's not like you make the observation vague so that you can interpret. It's actually in the act of exact redrawing that slowly there is inevitable error which makes room for design thinking. I mean, is that a correct interpretation versus?
Maybe I think I always like to talk about the error because everybody thinks that design is a kind of very rational activity directed to a certain goal that is already clear in your mind. So it's a kind of demystifying of that idea of design. But now we are talking about it, I realize that this process of retracing, in the beginning, you have this precise relation to the initial image or the initial map, but you want to reenact more or less this initial idea or image. But I realized that in the course of this retracing process, there is also a kind of striving for abstraction or
Uh-huh.
interpretation, to be not too precise. For example, if it's about a map, the initial image is a map with a city with streets and building blocks and buildings and rivers and so on and so on. In the beginning, you can try to define, oh, this is the river, this is the railroad, this is the block, so everybody still has the same meaning, so to say. You are still obeying to the original agenda of the drawing. What I do when I'm retracing is that as a matter of fact, I am making the image more abstract. I'm reducing it more or less to a pattern of lines in which it is not
Yeah.
extremely important if the line is a road or a path or a parcellation or a railroad or something like that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you are mm, um, reducing the initial image to a kind of more or less abstract pattern that you try to read as a composition.
And that's one of the values of having only a single line weight, more or less. Yes, I mean that all the lines are of the
Yeah,
same texture.
yeah. And of course, you can play with that as well because you can give them different weights as well. So you can introduce hierarchies in the pattern that you are discovering. Um,
Hmm.
you can give different weights to the different lines.
So, Fritz, how did you get into this? You write in this book that as a child, you love to travel and look out of the car window at the landscape, and you like to draw, and you love to look at
Uh-huh.
maps. So, what drew you to this admiration of the landscape, and particularly as a way of drawing thinking? What were the sort of key what was the key event or events in your life, maybe when you were 5 years old or
Yeah, yeah,
20
yeah,
years
yeah,
old,
yeah.
that sort of put you in this direction?
Yeah. I think I was maybe 3 years old. I have I have a very early memory. I didn't look from the car. We didn't have a car. My parents never
Oh,
had a car. In the Netherlands, that
I
is
see.
possible. And they loved,
A bike.
yes, they loved cycling. And
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
my father loved to in the weekend to make cycle tours. And
I see.
as a child, I was sitting in front of him at the steer of the bike, where there was a little iron chair where a child could
Yeah,
put in. And so I was in the front, and my father was behind me. And I saw the roads before me, I saw the whole landscape around me, and I was driven around by my father, who was singing Mozart symphonies.
he was singing Mozart symphonies and riding around the landscape with you.
Yes, my father was an admirer.
How do you sing a Mozart symphony? Can you do it?
He was fluting it. And so
Okay.
I
Yeah,
know
go on.
a lot of classical music just from the melodies he fluted with his mouth. He
Whistled,
whistled it.
yeah.
That's the word. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So he was such an enjoying and admiring person that and enthusiastic that he I think he inspired me and my brothers and my sister with that. And when I was some years older, then I saw that he prepared all those cycle tours on topographical maps. He had very precise military maps.
Ah,
They were those times in the Cold War times. They were more or less secret, so all military objects were obscured on the map. But so he had a very precise way of looking at the map, and then he said, "Oh, here is another path I don't know yet. Let's go there, and then we can turn to the right, and then we will have a view on the hill over there, or we can see the river flowing in the direction of." And so, in that way, he introduced me in map reading as well. I think that has
ah,
been also very important for me.
that's fantastic. So it's you on the bike. Because this, we used to also ride on the front
Yeah,
of the bike in India. And that experience of riding on bikes in twos and threes and talking and riding bikes in a
yeah,
leisurely way is something that's very lost, for instance,
yeah,
in modern contemporary US biking, which is all about, the gear
yeah,
and the
yeah,
speed and the sort of
yeah,
sports. So let's talk about now you riding a
uh-huh,
bike in India. Uh, let's
yeah,
go to India and let's connect back to our times over there. And I saw that in this book you have notated
yeah,
India twice. You talk about India in your section on drawing as form of
yeah.
knowledge, where on page 49 you talk about the
Oh, yeah,
fractal order of the
yeah,
Indian city. Uh, and this your wonderment at the idea that in the city there is a fractal order of the space in which every fold of the surface is used for putting things, doing
yeah,
things, selling things, showing things. Every single trunk of a tree you can sit on, every stone you can make fire on. There's this wonderment in your voice and in your drawing that, whereas you describe in your book on Idselmir, you talk about the problem of design is that since it's a summer city, how to bring humanity into
mhm,
emptiness where most of the time the
mhm,
landscape is empty there in northern Europe. Here in India you have a beautiful term, this fractal order of
yeah,
space in India, where every square inch is occupied, and you draw these drawings which are, which there is very little landscape, and you're trying to grapple with uh, 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 how to deal with
yeah,
this fractal nature. And then from there, the very next page, you go into experiencing architecture, and you have the same problem while trying to draw New York, because
yeah,
that also, has this, it's just overpacked,
yeah,
which you describe very differently as in America there is what you say on page 54, a strict and elaborate buildings that are not just quote unquote
mhm,
nice buildings. In America we have strict and elaborate buildings that are not just nice. In India there is
yeah.
fractal buildings. What do you mean by architecture buildings are not nice in the United States?
Ah, I was quite impressed during my no, it was my second trip to the United States, 1993, about those huge solid buildings, like the Sullivan buildings in Chicago. or buildings in Boston and New York. Um, those buildings before the modern movement, with those heavy stones, granite facades, a repetitive order of windows, buildings that don't especially specifically welcome you.
I
You
see.
understand?
I see.
Sullivan
That's
makes
interesting.
beautiful entrances, but the buildings as a whole, they are very rough, very closed on first sight. They are also standing
Not
not
nice.
friendly, not nice, not friendly, not very welcoming on first sight.
Aha.
That's quite a contrast to when you are walking around in a city in India where you are seduced to enter every shop, every building, to go around every corner, to enter everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. Yes, I think you're right. I mean, sort of American cities have this kind of standoffish aggression, whereas in the
Yeah,
Indian bazaar,
yeah,
you're always being
yeah,
seduced
yeah,
at every
yeah.
footstep.
But to tell the truth, I was
That's a fascinating
fascinated by
discussion.
that aspect of American architecture. Also, this roughness, it's a very strong character. It's a thing that in the Netherlands we don't know so much. In India, you don't hardly know it, I think. Although some of those castles and fortresses, of course, are also very solid. So
Yes.
yeah, you see it in America, but maybe it has universal aspects in it as well. Um, it does an appeal about a strong feeling, so to say. So it's a very architectural, um, strong architectural experience. That well,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, I liked it.
Did you
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it?
yeah,
Did you
yeah,
like the American city?
yeah.
Why did you like it? I sense a sort of criticism in your voice, but you are saying you liked it.
When I yeah, when I was in Boston and New York, and I saw those solid, heavy, closed buildings, and I walked around through Central Park, and then I saw those solid, heavy rocks coming up in the ground as a
Hmm.
part of the subsoil of Manhattan and America. Then remembering American nature, Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and so on. So I thought, wow, this is something. This is also a part of this globe of the world around us to admire in a way. It's there. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
try to grasp it. Try to
Hmm.
experience it and to give it its value. And for me, I think that's interesting that that exists as well as this fractal order in an Indian city, or all those balancing wooden brick houses in the Dutch city.
Yeah, I think Grand Canyon and kind of this
Yeah,
grandness to the American architecture versus the
yeah,
sort of extreme seduction and
yes,
mess, fractal quality of Indian city, and kind of I would describe a gentle
yeah,
civility
yeah,
to the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
European
beautiful.
uh,
Yeah,
city are all apt descriptions. So, in that context, now let's turn to ground zero. Let's go
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
Chandigarh,
yeah, yeah.
which is close to my heart, and I hope
Oh, yes,
you
yeah,
enjoyed
yeah,
your time there too. So, in your sketches, beautiful sketches of Chandigarh, you talk about your attraction to Chandigarh was in part due to Le
yeah,
Corbusier's own drawings about the city. And when you say that Corbusier's drawings contained a promise, as you say, quote,
Yeah.
promise of a modern architecture that is not sterile but expressive and sculptural against the dramatic background
Uh-huh.
of the eternal Himalayan landscape. So you have these drawings which read the plan as a kind of a hydrology, a drainage system against the Himalayan landscape. And then in that context, you locate the Capitol complex and the Capitol buildings and kind of also read them
Mhm.
as a
Mhm.
hydrology almost. And then you move on to sketches of the villages uh, and how they are so dense and how they are kind of encroaching, sort of building
Mhm.
up all around the city. And I like your fantastic description, and because it's true that you say the villages
Yeah.
are fighting back. I like that because in phase one, the villages were erased when Chandigarh was made. In phase two, the villages were
Yeah.
incorporated into the fabric of the city, but
Yeah.
their agricultural land was taken back. And there was a lot of hue and cry about the villages. And now, in a sense, one can see uh, that the villages are fighting back. Uh, and you argue that this collision will be uh, is decisive, that the future of the city is going to be determined by this battle
Mhm.
between the villages that are fighting back and the desire of the city and its upper class denizens to maintain
Ah, yeah.
and preserve the city uh, and its sense. Uh, and you end your discussion by saying, might it be that the capital survives as a haven in the
Yes.
fractal order of the Indian metropolis? So, kind of the villages fight back with their fractal, seductive orders, and they are coming for the modernist city. And you can kind of already imagine a future in which the capital complex will be kind of this besieged
Yeah.
haven within a fortress. Uh, uh, is this that's such an amazing description? Is that what you saw in Chandigarh? A battlefield?
Yes, I think so. In a sense, I saw a battlefield. A battlefield maybe between original intentions to create a kind of utopian new town dedicated to the modern post-colonial Indian state as a kind of a welfare state.
Yeah, yeah.
At the other hand, history and time that take over the city, life that takes over in a way that is partially obeying to the concept of the modernists, but partially still, yeah, embedded in very old traditions in Indian life. Also partially overtaken by maybe the forces of the market economy. Reality is far more complex than I think Le Corbusier and Jane Drew and Jean Reg could foresee. And I think
Right.
that causes a lot of conflicts. Well, maybe it's not exactly a battlefield, but I think the city is full of conflicts. And they will grow, I suppose, with the growing of the city and the growing of the pressure, with the traffic we were already talking about, with informal economy in the villages that are a huge force as far as I could observe. Um, so I think a lot of conflicts will come up. The idea of the Chandigarh city plan as the harmonious city of the future, yeah, that that will not be the reality in the future, I think.
Well, it won't be the imagined city, the harmoniously laid out in the landscape imagined city. But do you think the modernist plan, Corbusier's modernist plan, will work with the fractal
Hmm.
order of the Indian city in a constructive way, in a engaging way, or will it be a battle to the end and that it will just simply have to
Um,
lose?
as I remember, there are certain areas where the fractal order coexists with the modern structure of the plan with the main grid of the city streets. There are some of those V4s of those market areas that are
Yeah,
very
yeah.
vivid and alive, and there are also some places where the different market areas within the districts connect to each other, so they start to make up a bigger pattern. What I found intriguing that there is also sometimes the combination of the old villages with parts of the districts uh, where there are a lot of economic activities. So I think there is the possibility of a certain coexistence. But I also
Uh-huh.
think that maybe some interventions should be done to create the base for further growth of this coexistence. I remember also in your studio there had been some
Hmm.
proposals, for example, for a public transport system and for creating some stops of a public transport system along those main boulevards. And well, you can do that in different ways, of course, but maybe some additional nodes of public transport can help to connect different parts of the fractal order within the districts. Well, that's a little bit too
Hmm.
difficult.
Hmm.
Now we should sketch. And the other thing that intrigues me, Vikram, is that as we saw also the last times that I was there, that the city is now also growing outside the area of the original grid. And huh? so,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
in a way, I think
Yeah, that's right.
in the far future, the grid will just be a fragment of a city of a bigger order and a more extended area. And so I still think it is interesting to think about how what the position of this grid will be in a vaster metropolitan area, and what the position of the capital will be
Hmm.
within such a much bigger metropolitan area. I still think that the relicts of the original plan within this new context can be very, very interesting. And I think they should be handled with care because they represent an order that I think in the fast going modern urbanization in India hardly exists. Some of those elements of a capital
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
those linear parks with the drainage system in it, those continuous green structures, I think they can be of great value for the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, as kind of havens, like you said, a sort of residual places of peace and serenity
Yeah,
in an unleashed neoliberal globalization
yeah.
fractal urban order.
And in that sense, well, I'm not an Indian, but I can imagine that, in all Indian cities, you have some of those mosques or those old temple complexes or those old water wells, for example. Also, those places of quietness, of where time comes to a standstill. Also, in many cases, with the kind of harmonious spatial order. In a way, a place like the capital could be a kind of modernist version of places of contemplation that you in Indian cities already long times.
Yeah, it'd be great to integrate some of those into the fabric of the city.
Yeah, yeah. And as we discussed when we were in Chandigarh, the interesting thing, of course, is that those more contemplative places within Indian cities, in many cases, have to do with the practical aspect of water management.
Right.
And also the capital, well, the water in it is quite artificial, and but maybe it could get a new meaning in the context of water management of the future.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there is the beautiful lake on one side, which is a sort
Yes.
of a water management project.
Yeah.
But that's also a dying project because it's silting up
Yeah.
and
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
it's not going to work very long.
Mm, mm.
So there has to be a new hydrology which
Yeah.
has to be reckoned with if one is to think, and perhaps that has to go down the what is called the leisure valley with all its
Yeah. Yeah.
somehow a new hydrology has to be built around that and the two intermittent rivers
Yeah. Yeah.
somehow somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, Fritz, thank you very much. It has been such a pleasure to have you here on Architecture Talk, sharing your insights from your Mozarts in on the bike
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
to your insights on the American and the Indian city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well, Vikram.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is Vikram Prakash, your host, and our producer is the one and only Sammy Prouty, a graduate student of architecture here at the University of Washington in Seattle. I hope you all enjoyed our conversation, and if you did, please do take a moment to subscribe and to rate us on iTunes. See you next time. Take care. Goodbye.